Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Good evening. My name is Dr. Maha Hilal, and I'm the co-director of Justice for Muslims Collective. I want to thank you for being here with us tonight for our event titled White Fright and the Targeting of Black Muslims in Islamberg. We have hopefully three incredible speakers who will be joining us. One of our speakers has lost power, so we're still waiting to see if she can join, Mariam Abdul Karim, who is staff with JMC. But we will also have Tahira Amatul Wudud with us, as well as David Felix Sutcliffe. And we're really excited about that and really interested in to hear their feedback and their thoughts on the film and, their roles in the Islamberg community. So following the documentary, which I will show right after I finish this introduction, we will have the 2 or 3 panelists speaking. I have a set of prepared questions for them, but you can also feel free to use Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube to type any questions or comments and anything else you might want to address. So that's there for you to engage in this broadcast. The documentary is about 30 minutes. So our panel will follow at approximately 7:35, 7:40. Lastly, we will have ASL interpretation for the panel. However, it was a little bit complicated in terms of, and I can have the ASL interpreters address this if anyone wants to hear more about this. It's a little bit, I guess, complicated to do that with, to do ASL interpretation with films. So just want to give you the heads up on that. But there will be captions on the film and there will be captions on the speaking portion after the film, as well as ASL interpretation. So again, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to write them on whichever platform you're viewing this broadcast on. Otherwise, we are going to go ahead and start with our film. So thank you all, and I look forward to the panel engaging with you in about 30 minutes. So 1 second. It always takes a minute. Okay, hold on 1 second. Apologies, it is giving me some trouble. Okay. Sorry for the delay. This is telling me I need permission, so I'm waiting on that. So 1 second. And if you have any questions in the meantime or comments from what you've heard about the film, or if you've watched the film previously or have any questions for our panelists, you can also do that at this time while I'm trying to figure this out. Okay, so let's try this again.
When we join together like this, spread joy and peace, no need to pout. When we join together like this,
Are you able to see the screen? I'm assuming no, the film screen. Okay, this is really frustrating. Okay, hold on 1 minute. I think we lost permission somehow. Apologies for the delay there. So someone should be coming to help us with this in a second, and I'm so sorry. This is always what happens to academics when they try to do anything technological. Okay. Okay, I think we can get it now. Okay. And can you just increase the screen size, Candace?
tomorrow. Don't let peace slip through your hands.
When we join together like this,
Spread joy and peace, no need to pout. When we join together like this, it shows what love is all about. Set aside our differences and let us give love a chance. What we do will define tomorrow. Don't let peace slip through your hands. Set aside our differences and let us give love a chance. What we do will define tomorrow. Don't let peace slip through your hands.
Frightening examples of Islamic extremism right here in this country. There's actually a place there called Islamberg. They have a sign that says, "Welcome to Islamberg." It's about a 60, 70 acre large compound.
I'll never forget that phone call. They informed me that there was a plot.
We're going to be carrying an M4, 500 rounds of ammunition, and a machete. And if it gets down to the machete, we will cut them to shreds.
And the media will never allow us as African American Muslims to be presented as victims, even when we are.
Should Americans be concerned, or is this under control?
It can't be under control just through monitoring them.
We're all defined by what we do. Set aside our differences and let us give love a chance. What we do will define tomorrow. Don't let peace slip through your hands. Set aside our differences and let us give love a chance. What we do will define tomorrow. Don't let peace slip through your hands.
My name is Shakri Abdurrashid, and I'm 14 years old.
My name is Mohammed Salim. I'm 13.
My name is Sabuhi. I am 7 years old.
My favorite part of about living in Islamberg is I get to be around a lot of my friends and family.
It's very beautiful, the greenery. It's very peaceful.
I love it because it's special to me. It means something. It's a part of me wherever I go.
So if everybody can move to the side, sit down. We're about to start on the side seats, right over there. Just for the guests. The guests going the middle. The guests got the middle. Yes.
But what we're doing today, what we're doing as a community, a global community, standing up against the hate, I believe personally is going to change the tide of Islamophobia in this country. If 2015 was bad, I believe that 2016 is the turning point. Thank you very, very much. Enjoy the rest of the program. And hopefully the sun will stay out to keep us a little warm until we're hungry.
Thank you for coming. So beautiful.
Thanks so much. We'll be back.
The conditions in Brooklyn were pretty tough. There was violence in New York City, lots of violence. It was emerging, but we had a small little niche in East New York where there was dozens of Muslim families, and that provided some insulation. And so what the community did was something that was unheard of, which is they invested in property in the Catskills. And of course, you hear about people buying property in the Catskills. Now, that's a sign of wealth. This was a matter of survival.
There's people of the media who've registered, that's what I'm saying, registered and told us, and communicated with me. If you haven't registered, if I don't know you, how can I allow you to take footage from here? You understand? The danger that we are put in by irresponsible journalism, irresponsible members of media.
We're seeing thousands of inmates convert to Islam while they're in prison every year. And many of them, when they leave, go to religious communities like Islamberg.
You know, we've been telling you all about France's no-go zones, hundreds of Muslim-controlled areas around Paris that outsiders and cops don't dare to explore. They chose just to give it up. We have them here in the United States, too. I bet you did not know that.
These are truly no-go zones. Unlike the ones in Europe, which I have visited, you can actually walk into those no-go zones. You can walk in with your cameras, you can talk to people, but in these particular no-go zones, you cannot get into.
We have a bakery, a boutique. We have a gift shop. Here's our masjid. This is called Baytullah.
You have a gift shop. The community doesn't want to allow visitors.
Oh, we get people from all over. We have, communities come over.
I know that.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying the gift shop gives rumor.
That's true. I know never thought about that. Yeah. We'll have a gift shop if you don't want a lot of visitors.
Frightening examples of Islamic extremism right here in this country. Thousands of radical Islamists and so-called Islamic villages have been set up across the country.
The way Fox coverage of Islamberg has worked from the start is there'll be some event involving Muslims and violence. Sometimes it will be a real event, sometimes it will be an alleged event. It will be enough to make the news. A day or two afterwards, there will be a Fox segment about Islamberg trying to make some sort of connection.
This is where they're training for the jihad. This is where they're training people to cut our throats. How do you know that? I was up there, and on the far east perimeter, you can see buses, like school buses and vehicles that are riddled with bullet marks.
You see weapons?
I didn't actually see the weapons.
The people have heard shots going off, weapons being used.
This was a kind of a Fox perennial that they brought out once a year for some occasion, some excuse. That changed in January of 2015 after the Charlie Hebdo shootings. Fox didn't just run one segment, they ran 4 separate segments with 4 separate shows.
We've told you about the no-go zones, Muslim-controlled areas in and around Paris. But these microstates, typically off-limits to non-Muslims, are not limited to France. They're spreading across the globe. Well, the U.S., nearly 24 enclaves have popped up in 9 states, belonging to
Joining us now is Ryan Morrow. He's a security analyst at Clarion Project. He's been tracking.
There's actually a place
Muslims
there called Islamberg. They have a sign that says, "Welcome to Islamberg." It's about
We have them here in the United States, too. I bet you did not know that. Nearly 24 enclaves popping up across 9 different states. Now watch what happens when a stranger who is sought out.
Islamberg, upstate New York. They have weapons.
The Clarion Project did on Fox and Friends about how we had identified one of their jihadist enclaves.
We're going to be carrying an M4, 500 rounds of ammunition, light armor piercing, a pistol with 3 extra magazines, and a machete. And if it gets down to the machete, we will cut them to shreds. It has to be this way. It has to be done. I guess you might call me a militant minister or preacher, and I think that there is a religious war coming our way. It will be instigated by Muslims against all non-Muslim sects, and when it occurs, they will find evidence of our cruelty in the bullet-ridden, disfigured, and dismembered bodies of their brothers that we leave behind us.
To be in America, where you I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died.
This is our country, and we're never going to give it up to anyone. We will fight. There are 50 million patriots who are master gunners.
Remember the Alamo.
Ever.
We are Americans.
3 weeks ago, we couldn't be on this subject.
When it comes to the narcissistic nitty nincompoop sitting over there being all sanctioned.
The president is guilty of treason. The president is a coward. The president is a liar. The president is a traitor. And we want him impeached.
This fucking Muslim in charge needs to be cut the fuck down. Listen, my fellow Americans.
Hang the Line Canyon traitor, terrorist piece of shit. He's a traitor. Hang him.
We will join together and overthrow this thing in accordance with the Constitution. Yes, right. Necessary. Am I right?
He is a sort of natural leader, dresses well, bit of a dandy, dandified sort of Southern gentleman look with his red pocket square. It's not hard to see why he got almost 10,000 votes.
President Carter. Yes, Mr. Tidd, how are you doing today? I originally designed the tactics for 10 men who are good gunners, who are not afraid to die, and who are patriots to this great nation.
I will get you assistance if you need it. And also, you know I own a military surplus store.
Oh, I didn't know that. No kidding. Okay. Well, hey. Shane, this is Dr. Bob Doggart calling from Signal Mountain, Tennessee. Mark, this is Dr. Robert Doggart calling from... Hey, Steve, how you doing, man?
Do you know who this is?
Yeah, Tom, how you doing?
Hello.
Hi. Those guys have to be killed. Their buildings need to be burnt down, and if we can get in there and do that and get out with not losing a man, even the better. Jane, how you doing?
Good. Pull up that map again of Islam.
There's the camp right there.
Mm-hmm.
From a practical standpoint, it's easier to stick 2 or 3 guys in a utility vest, act like fix the water pipe, and paint the water source, because then that leaves them wondering, who did this?
Kill everybody. But there's children up there. I don't want us to do that. But there's always collateral damage.
A Signal Mountain man has pleaded not guilty in a plot to kill Muslims. Doggart wrote on Facebook that the town must be destroyed and that he planned to inflict, quote, horrible numbers of casualties. He was apparently afraid the town's residents were planning a terrorist attack, even though local law enforcement say no such plan exists. Now he could face a $250,000 fine and up to 5 years in prison.
When I heard about his plans, Robert Doggart's plans, I was on vacation visiting family in Virginia.
I had gotten home and my parents told me that it was important that we attended a meeting because someone had attempted to harm us.
I was scared and curious as to why somebody would want to come here and hurt us.
I didn't really know that someone would actually try to commit act of terrorism on their own country against their own people.
I was traveling, and I received a phone call from the FBI. They informed me that there was a plot, that an individual from a white militia group had been planning an attack. I'll never forget that phone call. It was a moment that in the back of our heads knew that possibly would take place one day. For many years, we were victims and targets and had received numerous threats. But to actually hear it from a federal agent was quite real.
I'm good. How about yourself? I'm hearing a rumor we're supposed to get some snow or some kind of rain or something in the next couple of days. I know. I know. You're welcome. Thanks for checking in. Bye-bye. You too. Living on Islamberg serves as not only a sense of providing a solid community, but of providing protection in so many ways. And I feel very vulnerable not being there in this climate that we're in. When we found out that he was free, it was frightening. And the kid gloves with which he was handled became unbelievable. And that no media outlet knew about it, had been talking about it, was stunning. And we realized that we really didn't have a role to play as victims. We really had no voice. And if this man had had his way, there'd be a bloodbath in Islamberg. And nobody was talking about it. So we thought about how we would empower ourselves. And we held a press conference. We wrote articles. We went on social media. And we made so much noise.
Stop harassing American Muslims. Stop harassing American Muslims.
Because we thought our neighbors, our friends, the American public has been done a disservice by not knowing what was happening.
Stop harassing American Muslims. Stop harassing American Muslims.
Robert Doggart has been on house arrest after he allegedly planned to attack a school and mosque in Islamberg, New York. But Muslim groups say it's a double standard that he's not in jail when a Muslim accused of planning an attack would be in prison.
Robert Doggart, American Taliban. Robert.
Other threats that Islamberg has faced are bloggers giving out the address of the property and encouraging people to come see for themselves, trespassing, and the mailing of death threat letters. These attacks will not stop until citizens and the government stand up for that which is right.
My message to Robert Doggart is that even if you and your friends try to come here, you can never stop us. We are always protected. I just can barely even talk to you, even if you're not even here, because you tried to do so much horrible things. But just try again, you will be stopped. Your friends try, and you'll be stopped. That's all.
Heath. Yes. Yes. Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
We're a local news station around here. We're looking to see if we can just talk to anyone who was in the courtroom to kind of get some reaction of what they've heard so far today.
Sure.
Which way? Oh, okay.
And he purports to be an ordained Christian minister. So let's own that for a minute. But I'm going to say that I reject that he was doing that in the name of any faith that I recognize. Okay. But it's not just that he was a white Christian minister. That's the story. It's that this was an African-American Muslim community. And the media will never allow us as African-American Muslims to be presented as victims, even when we are.
Robert Doggett is part of a dark underground network. He had a lot of supporters who believed in his mission. And they need to see that this government takes these sorts of threats seriously.
I don't want to kill children, but there's always collateral damage. Those are some of the last words you heard the defendant tell the source on April 9th outside the City Cafe. Those were the words of a dangerous man who was looking to find gunners and gunmen to help carry out an attack he planned for several months. There's only one verdict supported by the evidence, and that's guilty.
There never was an attack. Nobody was ever actually injured. We definitely haven't heard proof of religious intent. Anything you've heard about why Mr. Doggett did this is because he believes these people are terrorists. Why does he believe that? Well, we know Fox News is one of the reasons he believes that, right?
Right. He said Fox News is a legitimate news source. Most people who watch Fox believe what they see.
Which, how effective was that really?
It's a gamble, right? It's a gamble that there's at least 4 or 5 there are enough hardcore Fox watchers on the jury that they'll just tie it up somehow.
I don't know. I just felt that his closing argument, the defense, his closing argument was very disjointed.
It was this sort of gratuitous use of inflammatory situations.
Absolutely.
And hoping to appeal to either the prejudice or the bigotry, maybe even, or the ignorance.
Similar to what Fox News does.
Yeah, and what he hoped he would be able to connect the jury to.
We don't know what the jury is hung up on at this point, but we do know, just to give you a little bit of background, it is composed of 6 white men and 6 white women, and both alternates are also white women. For now, reporting live in Hamilton County, Allison Levine, News Channel 9. Fair. There were a lot of smiles, lots of pictures being taken. I mean,
Well, this is a big thing for the community. Just so that you understand what the community is. It's a very relatively small community, very private community, often hounded over the past 10 years by the media with all of the wrong reasons,
and for all of the wrong reasons. And so what you have today is the conclusion of a week's worth of what is this community about and truth telling. And it felt good. And I think what you saw as people came out smiling was finally we've been heard in a court of law, because we've been tried in the court of opinion for years.
We have a thing called the 40 hadiths, and just like 40 etiquettes. First one is what you want for your brother, what you want for yourself. It's just about being together, loving each other, loving your brother and sister, loving your enemy. It's just a very peaceful and beautiful religion.
Open your hearts up to the truth. Don't let their lies bamboozle you. Right here, right now, we're living proof. We're all defined by what we do. We're all defined by what we do. Set aside our differences and let us give love a chance. What we do will define tomorrow. Don't let peace slip through your hands.
Set aside our differences. Let us give love a chance. What we do will define tomorrow. Don't let peace slip through your hands.
Ryan, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, and we know that Donald Trump watches the show. So, Donald, it's more than ISIS, Mr. President-elect. Muslims of the Americas, they claim to have 22 of these enclaves.
You know they got us on the run. Don't stop being tested. This clarity is on the run. Open your heart to the truth. Don't let them lies lose you. Right here, right now, we're living proof. We're all defined for what we do. Yeah, defined for what we do. Yeah, for what we don't do. Yeah, what you gonna do? Yeah. Set aside our differences. Let us give love a chance. What we do will define tomorrow. Don't let peace slip through your hand. Set aside our differences. Let us give love a chance. What we do will define tomorrow. Don't let peace slip through your hand. Set aside our differences. Let us give love a chance. What we do will define tomorrow. Don't let peace slip through your hand.
Okay, everyone, I'm sorry again for the disruption in the technology. This apparently is not a good day for my computer. But okay, hold on one second. Let me switch the interpreter. Okay, so apologies. And I hope this does not detract you from how amazing the film that we just saw was, and our upcoming panel that with David Felix Sutcliffe and Tahira Ahmeduludud. As you can probably imagine, they both have extensive bios. And so I'm going to read them to you so that you know how incredible it is to have them join us today and really speak to the film, and also what we should know about the community in Islamberg and the fight against anti-Blackness and Islamophobia. So without further ado, Tahira Ahmeduludud is an attorney with a strong record of civil rights advocacy, civic engagement, and interfaith activism. Tahira has served as legal counsel to a Muslim congregation standing against white supremacists who harassed and plotted a thwarted, violent attack against its mostly African American community. One of the bold and pioneering actions taken by Tahira and her colleagues was the filing of a lawsuit in federal court using a statute called the FACE Act, signed into law in 1994, which likely has never been used to protect a mosque before. Tahira was named a top woman of law by Massachusetts Lawyers Weekly. She also received the coveted Dean's Distinguished Alumni Award from Western New England University School of Law. She can be reached across all social media platforms at, and then Tahira, Tahirah, capital AW. And I will put that in the stream as well. Also with us is our incredible filmmaker who made this film, White Fright, David Felix Sutcliffe. He is an Emmy award-winning documentary filmmaker whose work examines systemic racism and Islamophobia. His first film, Adama, is an hour-long documentary that explores the story of Adama Ba, a 16-year-old Muslim girl growing up in Harlem who was arrested by the FBI on suspicion of being a potential suicide bomber. T-Error, T in parentheses Error, which is on Netflix and PBS, was co-directed by David, and Lyric Cabral is a feature-length documentary debut and marks the first time that filmmakers have had access to an entire active FBI informant in a domestic counterterrorism entrapment sting. Terror won a special jury prize at Sundance and an Emmy Award for Outstanding Investigative Documentary. His work has been profiled in the New York Times, on CNN, Democracy Now!, and This American Life. David is a former Sundance Edit Lab and Creative Producing Lab Fellow and was a 2018 Soros Equality Fellow, as well as a 2017 to 2019 Pew Fellow. So it's really exciting to be able to speak with both David and Tahira this evening. Again, thank you for bearing with us with the technical difficulties, and I'm really excited to have them both with us. Unfortunately, Mariam Abdul Karim, who is Justice for Muslim Collective's Racial Justice and Equity Advisor, could not be here as she lost power. So we're really sad about that, but we hope to bring this video and our speakers once again in the future to have another event. So with that, I want to start by asking both Tahira and David if you could talk about your reactions to the film. I know you've all, of course, spent a lot of time both investing in the community and watching this film numerous times, but what is it like for you to watch it yet again, also in the context of Black History Month?
Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening, Maha. David, it's nice to see you. I watched the video again last night and again today, and it's remarkable how, first off, how much the children in those videos have grown up, even over the course of 3 or 4 years. They still have such baby faces in those videos, but now they're teenagers. And I was really touched by their words of wisdom and how those words of wisdom are still relevant today. It's not lost on me also that while we were in the process of making the documentary, we were also knee deep in trauma. And while I often view what we did as what just needed to be done, I have the maturity now and the hindsight to be able to look back and say that we were traumatized and responding from a place of trauma. And that was captured in the documentary. But deeply proud of the entire community for doing what our ancestors have taught us to do, and that is to fight back. And we did it with our words, with our advocacy, with our strength. And to me, with the passage of time, I look at the video with a whole new, profound sense of deep respect for the entire community.
Thank you, Tahira. Of course, I have some follow-up questions for you, but I want to first give David a chance to reflect back on the film.
Yeah, well, it's great to see both of your faces, and thank you so much for organizing this and to the Justice for Muslims Collective. I feel like I should have watched it last night to prepare. It's been a while, and I feel, I'm struggling. Yeah, I'm having a very emotional response. Like when you make a film, you watch it so many times, you become desensitized to it. It's hard to kind of preserve like the emotional impact and content. And just seeing it now, it really, I'm overwhelmed. And especially the young people. That's really the kind of strikes you right to the heart. And really hearing what you said, Tahira, about like that. This was at the time that the community was speaking from a place of trauma, and I feel that, and maybe now more so than I did at the time. I think sometimes there's, as a filmmaker, and I'm struggling with this, and I've evolved in my own career since even making this film. But I think as a filmmaker, sometimes there is a little bit of emotional distance that happens in order to kind of go through the process, and but and then there's also the artistic ego where you sometimes feel embarrassed of your films and mistakes, and of course I see parts of that here, but I also see what's much louder is just the beauty of this community and the horror of what they had to experience, and the astonishing power and courage and vitality of their response and their refusal to kind of to be defined and to be to be dominated by this threat.
Thank you so much, David. Tahira, you talked a little bit about this in the film, of course, about the community in Islamberg. Can you tell us a little bit more about, how they came to bring about this community, how they created this community, and also just how you got involved personally in terms of the legal case?
For sure. The community of Islamberg was created in the early 1980s, mostly by people in my parents' generation who wanted to adhere to being able to practice Islam as Sunni Orthodox Muslims. The majority of them had converted from various denominations of Christianity in their adulthood. And it was their goal and the goal of their spiritual guide and advisor that they be sort of removed from all of the oppressive systems facing African Americans in the inner city as we had lived. So the majority of those who moved to Islamberg were actually located in New York City, particularly in Brooklyn, myself included. And so when our families gathered money and found a location where they could relocate, it was now what we recognize as Islamberg. Islamberg is located 45 miles southeast of Binghamton. So anyone familiar with the Binghamton University school system, that's the location. And it's quite rural, and it was even more rural in 1984. But they took a leap of faith that planting themselves there and depending on their own skill for survival would pan out better than remaining in inner city East New York, where we now know, and you read certain books and what have you, and people describe East New York as being the killing fields, that we would not have survived that. Like those various systems were not designed for African Americans, poor people, and working class people to thrive. We would not have survived that. So as it would happen, a large segment of those in Brooklyn moved upstate New York. Others moved to other parts of the country. My family and I was 9 years old when we left, relocated to Western Massachusetts. But this is the community of my origin. It consists of my family, my friends, my lifelong friends and family. And there's never been a moment where I have not been connected to the community of Islamberg. And so as the white supremacist attacks on the community started happening, and way before 2015, so way before 2015, my colleague Tahira Clark and I had been fighting the white supremacist attacks on Islamberg going back to 2007. And that is, of course, with the help, support, encouragement of the entire community. And so that's sort of the history. It's a beautiful area. The folks are working class, educated, connected. At this point, there's probably about 4 or 5 generations, which is something to really be proud of. Because if you're thinking of people my parents' age, you're talking about people in their 70s, having children like me in their 40s, and some of us having children in our who are now adults, and some of those children having children. And that is nothing short of a miracle in the United States of America in this day and age.
So true. David, can you tell us, how you learned about the Black Muslim community in Islamberg and what got you involved in making this film?
Yeah. I actually grew up in upstate New York. It's still a bit of a drive, but it's the landscape is very familiar, so it felt familiar to me when I first kind of came into the community, even though I never knew about Islamberg growing up. But I did grow up in a mixed race family with 3 Black sisters, and I saw the racism that they were exposed to and confronted to in this space. And I was very aware just going to school with these, this kind of like in this rural area, just the kind of racism and bigotry that existed. So I think that there was a combination of, finding out about, I think someone sent me a Twitter message about just a link to one of the articles that had kind of was addressing how Robert Doggett had been released on bail. And just hearing about the case was horrifying, and seeing the fact that there was, very, very little press attention at that point, just really caught my attention. And at that point, and still to this day, a lot of my work has focused on Islamophobia. My first film, my entry into filmmaking, was really through a student of mine. I was teaching at an after-school arts program in Harlem, and one of the young students there, Adama Ba, who I mentioned in my bio, she was arrested by the FBI, and I saw the kind of national security apparatus just swallow her up and her family. And I spent 5 years documenting them and their experiences, being traumatized by the state. And I think that really brought me into this space of kind of leaning into the experiences of Muslim Americans in post 9/11 landscape. And, I made another film after Adama that explored the use of the FBI's use of informants, which is, has been kind of central to their tactics in terms of like conjuring up a threat. So it was after finishing up that film that someone sent me the Twitter message, and it kind of brought it on my radar. And I reached out to the community pretty shortly thereafter and said, I had been like observing just the inequity and the kind of disproportionate response to white supremacist threats as opposed to Muslim identified threats. And this was a clear moment where that inequity was very visible, and I thought this should be documented. Like, that people need to know about what's happening here.
Right, absolutely. Thank you.
Maha, may I jump in?
Yes, let me just switch the interpreters really quick.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, awesome. Yeah, go ahead, Tahira.
So just at that moment where David is discussing how he came to hear about the story, I think it's also important for me to share that we had, as you could see from the video, there had been an onslaught of right-wing media whose jobs it was and whose missions it was to define and destroy us on their platforms. And so when David had approached us, you have to understand that there was a deep level of concern and frankly of people just wanting to just not know who they can trust and just wanting to just go back into our own comfort zone and not bring in anyone to do anything. But as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control of all things, we trusted him. And that's an extraordinary thing, even in retrospect, recognizing the trauma that we had been subjected to for years, the trauma we had been subjected to for years, the people that we had let into our lives who hurt us, that allowing David to come in was a leap of faith. And I'm really very honored and grateful that it ended up working out so nicely. But you have to understand that more often than not, we'd rather shrink away from allowing any outsiders to come in and do anything. We're staunchly independent and fiercely protective of ourselves. And it's very hard to come in and work your way through that with the eye that he did, for the length of time that he did, and with the artfulness, class, and respect that he did.
Wow, that's amazing. And David is, of course, one of the best filmmakers that I know, and has really captured a lot of Muslim stories beautifully.
Definitely.
I'm grateful for that.
Let me also just say, like, how honored I am, and thank you so much, Tahira, for being the ambassador, and kind of just to you and the rest of the community. I recognize and deeply value that trust, from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you. You've honored it, and we're grateful.
So Tahira, I'm curious to hear from you. There was the clip that David had in the film about Zuhdi Jasser, our amazing Muslim native informant, who talked about Islamberg, being the site of radicalization. And so I'm just curious from you to hear a little bit about, the scapegoating of Black Muslims within the Muslim community. And granted, he's not a great example, but just in terms of that, is it happening in other parts of the Muslim community, and the scapegoating of Black Muslims?
The reality is that this is greater than the scapegoating of Black Muslims. It is the attempt to vilify all Muslims. So this is much larger than the idea of African Americans. This is a part of a concerted campaign, a white supremacist campaign to control, to define, and to destroy Muslims. Hard stop, period. Deep breath in, exhale out, and then to continue to say that the reality is that it's a double punishment that is faced by African Americans, because we also know that not only is xenophobia a powerful weapon of dissension and hatred in this country, but so is racism, anti-Black racism, and racism against African Americans. So I don't see this as a battle between co-religionists in Islam. I see this as a wider, and this, I always get his name confused, Jasser, even though I'm sure he does not identify as white supremacist constructs exist even in non-white bodies, because there are people who benefit from white supremacist construct, and he's just part of that. I don't even want to give him any dignify his comments with his name, but anyway. So we just got caught up in all of this hatred and all of the isms, but they picked the wrong ones, because we fought back in a way that this country has never seen people really fight back, but in a way that this country has always seen people fight back, because anytime African Americans have been targeted, we fought back. We have the slave revolt of 1811. We had the enslaved people of the early 1600s, 1800s, who really tried to maintain their identity as Muslims. We have the East Columbus Massacre of 1917, and watching those communities fight back. And in the 2020s, we fight back using different means. But if there's anybody who could have done this and could model strength for the Muslim community, it was us. Unequivocally, it was us.
Right. Yeah, and the Black Muslim struggle has been so important to, Muslims being in the United States in general, and the many rights that we have because of the Black Muslim struggle. So that's, an excellent and much needed point. I think that a lot of Muslims need to be reminded of. So for you, David, I know that part of the emphasis in this film was about, the discrepancy in how attacks against Muslims are reported versus attacks against other communities, as well as sort of like how the perpetrators are sort of constructed and viewed. So, I'm wondering from you if, you think anything has changed since making this film. Obviously, I know media is like a big entity, but if you've seen any sort of changes in the way that the media is covering Muslims, either as victims or as perpetrators, and then just if you think your film was able to kind of break through to some extent in pushing forward that discrepancy.
I don't know. It's really hard for me to evaluate what has changed. I think while I was working on this film and the previous films, I was acutely aware of FBI strategies, FBI tactics, and from what I can see, and you're the scholar, I defer to you, but it appears that at least that the use of entrapment and informants has slowed down a little bit. I think it's been replaced by other tactics and other strategies. But I think by and large, the disproportionality has not changed. I think every year the FBI director goes before Congress and makes their budget request. And, maybe now they make some brief mention of white supremacist threats, but for the most part, they continue to abuse the Muslim terrorist narrative to kind of poke the heart, win hearts and minds amongst white members of Congress to give them the dollars that they require. And I think, media continues to be an institution and industry that is disproportionately governed by white males. And I think that they continue to see any threat. They fail. They cannot see themselves as the threat. They can only see the other as this kind of the source of harm. So I can't say that I do see much of an evolution. I do see an evolution on the side of activists to be more unapologetic, to be more bold, to be more vocal about characterizing the threats that exist and saying that, we're not just talking about lone wolves, we're talking about law enforcement. We're talking about like the state as a source of threat. And I think that was something that was so clear to me making my first film. This Muslim American family was traumatized and terrorized by the FBI, by Homeland Security, by immigration. And so I think that there is, that conversation is becoming more more palpable. At least I think amongst, I can't say what it is outside of like the social circles I occupy, but I think that there is more awareness and more receptivity, amongst like white progressives, that law enforcement is a threat, that these are not kind of the kind of trustworthy entities that that people have been raised to believe, white folks have been raised to believe.
Right. So kind of, Tahira, piggybacking on that question, I know you talked in the film about like the media, never recognizing Muslims as victims. And so I'm just, wondering, like, as you've continued this work, has there been anything that you have found to be effective or ways of pushing back against this, constant narrative? And, not just in terms of like when the story is about Muslims that's being minimized, but also, in 2019, for example, there was all those white supremacist shootings, right? And they kept bringing Muslims into it, like as if the only way to understand those acts was to compare them to the, basically the original form of terrorism.
One of the things we always have to remember is that mainstream media is commercial. It's motivated by capitalism, and a good story sells. And you'd never really want to shock the conscience of your consumers. And so since 2001, since the 9/11 attacks, it has fed the American soul and spirit to constantly vilify Muslims. And that's frankly what we collectively, Americans, have been used to receiving. And it's hard to just say, okay, well, guess what? It's 2015. Let's change the narrative. And so even when the narrative doesn't fit, they're still going to try to fit it in because they don't want to lose viewers.
Right.
They don't want to lose readers. And there's always a moral villain in society. And for 20 years, it has been the Muslim.
Right.
Social media is powerful. And it was only through social media that we were able to even tell people that Robert Doggart had created this plot, because the government had actually created a plea deal with them, told us to sit quietly while they put the bow on it, and then presented us a finished done deal. So you want to talk about traumatizing and then compounding the trauma by state actors? Oh, for sure, that happened. And then it was only with the initiative of the community that we did press conferences and held interviews and relentlessly told the story. So we didn't need CNN, who wasn't interested in us. We didn't need them. We had a grassroots movement. I know you want to switch interpreters. You want me to pause with my question now?
Sure, 1 second. Okay.
And so our grassroots movement is really what pushed the story into the public discourse. So what is happening now with media? Well, who knows? I mean, we have insurrectionists scaling the Capitol building. We have a man in a trailer blowing up an entire block in a major metropolis, in a major state, in a major city of the United States of America. Like, for real, what is selling? Who's the moral villain now? And where do we fit into that? A huge question mark. It remains to be seen. I would say, though, that at this point, it does feel like white supremacy is the identified culprit. It is it's where we are putting our appropriate focus. And if there is a moral villain in society, it appears to be white supremacists, plural. And at the rate that life has been happening lately, I don't know, that might change next week. But for right now, I'm here for it.
Well, you're amazing. You're an inspiration. And really, the Muslim community is very lucky to have you to continue the fight and struggle. For you, David, I'm just, wondering, Since this movie obviously was viewed by Muslims and non-Muslims alike, was there something in particular that you wanted non-Muslim audiences to gain from watching this film?
Yeah, I think through the process, I just developed like such profound respect and appreciation for the community and for their determination. As Tahira says in the film, like just that the origins of this community is one predicated on survival, that instinct to survive, and to move this community upstate to this place to find protection and to continue to fight for it. That I think a lot of narratives, a lot of like Western media values this, like the narrative of the hero, while failing to appreciate it and acknowledge just how survival is its own victory, and I think that like this community like shows that, and I wanted that to be felt. I wanted it to be palpable for non-Muslim viewers. And like watching it now, I also feel conflicted. I was talking about it with my wife earlier, just, the decision to call it White Fright, that it centers the kind of like, the darkness. And I think that might've been a decision in terms of marketing. I was thinking like, this is a story, I can sell this story easier than I can say like the beauty of this community. That story, like, I don't know if it will grab attention quite the same way that White Fright will. But I did want to, I had a producer who once said, put the aspirin in the applesauce, try to find like, this like safe way to kind of, to put people in the seats. And then once they're there, you have this opportunity to kind of share a different narrative with them. And I hope that I accomplished that here. And I wanted to, share this narrative to which is underexplored and under discussed, at least at the time. It's shifting now, as Tahira said, but just like how scary white people are and how scary their fear of their perceived threats to their own kind of supremacy, how frightening and terrifying that is. And for people to acknowledge the consequences of media distortion and as well as media silence, and also to interrogate just the nature of Islamophobic press and policy, and wanting to have folks recognize that we have this massive terrorism industrial complex, which is $1 trillion a year are supposedly spent on national security, and an infinitesimal portion of that, if any, it can be argued, is dedicated to the safety of communities like Islamberg. It has really nothing to do with safety and has everything to do with capitalism, with profit. And there wasn't space to kind of make all of those connections here, but I think it was my effort to kind of like destabilize the narratives that have really have stained the consciousness of so many folks who are exposed to mainstream media.
Right.
Maha, can I jump in?
Of course.
Just even thinking about how David's reflecting on how we entitled the documentary or the name, etc. It's worth reminding ourselves that we collectively have not always been comfortable referring to white supremacy. For real. Like, I would never, ever, 4 years ago, use the words white supremacy in public. It just was not an appropriate thing that the ears were prepared to hear and digest. It was something that you talked about privately. And in some instances, we saw white supremacy violence, but we didn't identify it as that because it's not always presented as that. And sometimes even as you struggle and suffer from it, you don't have the vocabulary to name it. Right. And so I want us to be kind to ourselves as we think about how we did something 2 or 3 years ago to tell the story, to survive, because that was what was appropriate at that time. And that was what our collective ears and hearts and minds were going to be able to be spoon-fed. I think about how in 2007, when I think about Tahira Clark and I, and how the attacks on Islamberg had really started up about 2007. Well, what happened in 2007 was the presidential campaign of President Obama.
Right.
And we know that white supremacy was off the hook in 2007 and 2008 and 2009. And other communities felt it, not just the threats that we now know President Obama got on the campaign trail and then once he was in office. But other communities felt it, right? But we couldn't publicly name that because the world was not ready for that conversation. It was not an appropriate part of the Overton window, the discussion around white supremacy. And so we've come so far. And I want to just acknowledge that we've come so far that now we can name something that has been in existence since 1619. And we are able to now publicly discuss it, have conversations around it, analyze it, look at data on it, and be unapologetic in our confrontation of it. But it's remarkable to me that literally 4 years ago, I would not have had this conversation online with you all. I would have had it offline. But now we're in a place where the truth is undeniable and we can sort of speak that truth. And there's some wisdom in giving people enough that they can digest it. Otherwise, our story would have been rejected completely just by the use of certain language that we can use now that we couldn't use 4 or 5 years ago.
Right. So, in the context of white supremacy, and maybe you can both answer this question, we are showing this film on the heels of the insurrection or whatever you want to call it of white supremacists, and where it was obviously like very visible. The intentions were very explicit. There was no question about what happened. However, if you're watching the media, for example, CNN, I think, has spent like a month asking, how did this happen? And it seems like they should just read like a book or two and give them some insight. But so with respect to like how heavily Islamberg has been targeted by white supremacists and what we've now seen sort of in the national context, like what is it going to take for people to understand the seriousness of white supremacy? And I know that's a big question, but
I mean, what it has to take is to recognize that not all white supremacists are wearing hoods and calling themselves KKK, because that's another thing that we've done. We've been very generous. The collective, we've been very generous with how we talk about white violence.
Right.
We have created a boogeyman that looks like the KKK, but in actuality, the boogeyman doesn't look like that. And so how do we change it? Is that we call out behaviors. And no, CNN, there's no mystery as to why this happened, because the same people who have been targeting Islamberg, and it's not just Robert Daggert, these people have been targeting the community for a long time, have also been held up in Michigan, taking over federal property. They've also been responsible for, I think it was Michigan with the federal property, but they've also been responsible for a kidnapping and violent threat against the governor of Michigan, a woman. We don't really talk about that anymore. Why have we given cover to that? Why aren't we talking about that anymore? A woman and her family, a governor, a threat of a political assassination almost happens to a woman, and it's news for a day or two, and then we keep moving, and then we say, oh, well, why is this happening? Why is this happening? Because you let it happen.
Absolutely. And sorry, quick question for both of you. Can I keep you for about 10 more minutes since we had all the technical difficulties? Okay, awesome. And then David, did you want to answer that question, or you have any insight on that?
Yeah, I think, like white supremacy exists along a spectrum, the same as white supremacist violence. And I think that, I have to recognizing that white supremacy is the belief that white people are superior to all other races, and that manifests itself in a variety of ways. It manifests itself in the professional spaces I occupy, the fact that white men continue to receive funding to make films, receive awards for making those films. And I think it was really around the time that I was making this film that I started to recognize, and there was a growing conversation in the documentary community criticizing white filmmakers for going into communities of color and telling stories of which they are now directly impacted. And that conversation has been really helpful for me, and I think it's helped me evolve as a filmmaker and step away from that model And so I think that, like, how does this change? I think it has to happen along in spaces like, I think, like, white people have to give up whatever power they, not just surrender, but it's about transition. We need to transition. We need to just transition. And so I think that I'm reflecting on that. And, within the space, it's, like, how can this change? It has to happen, my life is built around narratives, so how do we kind of redistribute narrative capital? So that's something that I'm processing, and I'm trying to have conversations with, like, my white colleagues about how do we leverage our resources, leverage our networks, and also it's not just for this, for the good Samaritan factor or for the feel good, pat myself on the back, but I also feel like that creates space for superior storytelling, more honest, more authentic, more accurate storytelling. And I think that the power of those stories can help push this conversation, can push culture, can push society further into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And hearing you speak and Tahira speak about this, one thing that has struck me too, and I'll just use CNN as an example because they're like fake liberal. They keep showing like breaking news of like new videos of the insurrection as if that's gonna like sway people. It's like, oh, you didn't see this? Well, maybe this will change your mind. And it's like, but it's not going to change anyone's mind because you have to accept that white supremacy is a problem, right? In the first place for anything subsequent to have an effect on you. So, I guess I'm just, curious from maybe you, Tahira, especially, like, what can we do in the meantime about these narratives as we're like gradually trying to shift them?
One area of opportunity is education. And I know that sounds so trite, but bear with me for a second. We have to tell the stories and the history of African Americans in the United States, of the violence that has been perpetrated on us. We have to make space to tell the stories of very brave leaders in our American history. And a lot of that history is now becoming more well known. You have historians who have dedicated their lives to telling the story, to doing the research, to piecing it together. To this day, it is still happening. And so we have to encourage those historians, those writers, and those storytellers. We have to fund their work and give a platform to their work to tell our history. Right. We didn't just appear here. These stories and these issues did not just start to happen. And so being able to take a step back and do the historical perspective and analysis, to me, is greatly, greatly not only appreciated, but very important. And then where do we go from here? We continue to do programs like what you're doing. We continue to give young people the words to assign to experiences that they're having, to things that they are learning. And as consumers of the news, we continue to make sure that editorial departments know what we will and will not tolerate, and that we're not going back to the days of creating in Muslims a fake villain.
Right, right. So maybe I'll ask you a follow-up question just about, like, how has, since you won the case for the community in Islamberg, how have they been doing? Like, I'm assuming they've probably continued to face attacks. Someone also commented that there was, in 2019, another plot. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Do you want me to pause for the interpreters to switch?
Oh, yes. Thank you. You're more on top of it.
So your question was, how's the community of Islamberg now, and what has happened since the documentary has come out? So yes, in 2019, there were some young men from Rochester who had been planning, again, a violent attack on the community. They had never been there. They knew nothing about it other than what they had seen on social media and Fox News. And that plot was disrupted and the New York State law enforcement was really aggressive in prosecuting and holding them accountable. And the community also supported those efforts by law enforcement, attended the hearings, gave victim statements, etc. It is much quieter now than it had been over the previous years. I attribute that to the fierce and strong response of the community. And in addition to sending the global communities a message about who we are and making sure that we define our own selves, we've also let local law enforcement know what we will and will not tolerate. So you think you're going to make a deal with the devil? Wrong. And so no prosecutor wants to be embarrassed by having the victims come out with their legal team and disrupt their own plans. And so I think law enforcement has also learned what they can and cannot get away with in terms of sweeping problems under the rug when it comes to this particular community. And again, for our community, it's always greater than just us. It is always our hope that we are modeling strength and courage so that other communities, other minoritized and marginalized communities can see a path towards self-advocacy. It's very, very important to the community of Islamberg and all of the sister communities of the Muslims of America, just in a larger sense, that what we do is to help inspire others to protect their religious rights on American soil. Because let's face it, minoritized and marginalized practitioners of all religions are under attack when Muslims are under attack. All of them are. And so you must fight back, you must respond, you must self-assert, and you must join in solidarity to help those do it. And that's, there was a gap, I think, in how the community, the Muslim community, responded to Islamberg at that time. I think a lot of Muslims were hands off, and they should have been there. They should have been there.
Right. So I'm going to ask you maybe one or two questions and then we'll conclude. And David, feel free to chime in if there's something I'm missing or you think needs to be addressed. So, Tahara, I have two questions for you. One, based on the recent insurrection, again, the idea of a domestic terrorism bill has resurfaced. Obviously this has never really been invisible altogether, but again, it's been resurfaced. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about your thoughts about this potential and, what impact it would have on Muslims.
The interesting thing is that when we were dealing with Doggett in Tennessee, we kept saying, call this domestic terrorism. This meets all of the elements, the attempt to use violence or threat to coerce or change or influence a political agenda, whatever the statutory definition is of terrorism. But in the United States of America, we do not have a classification of a crime called domestic terrorism. And so terrorism always has to be connected with an international actor, as you well know. But why is that so hard for people to pin down and to tie down? And we found ourselves really looking at statutes and wondering, well, why is this missing? Well, again, it's missing, we believe. It's missing because of groups like the KKK, groups like those scaling the walls of the Capitol, where when you define terrorism and make it domestic without a connection to an international actor, guess who you're going to be looking at? You're going to be looking at all of those same people who helped plan a plot against the governor of Michigan, scaled the walls of the Capitol, shot up a church in South Carolina, right? So you see where this is going. I don't know if I have a complete formulated thought on the creation of a domestic terrorism classification. I think for me, the jury is still out. I have grown a lot since the Doggett issue has put us in the news to be discussing these issues. I've I've run for office. I've really grappled with legislation and being able to understand its impacts. And I think I still need some more time to come up with an opinion as to whether a domestic terror classification is appropriate and if it will do what we think will meet the eye, and that is to capture these domestic terrorists that are running around causing havoc in the country. I just don't know, because I'm always concerned about how there'll be a disparate and adverse impact on communities of color in any legislative construct.
Right. So my last question for you before we do concluding remarks is there a way that the larger Muslim community and the larger community and society in general can support the community in Islamberg?
I think we have to go back to our fundamental principles, our foundational principles as Muslims, and that is to look out for each other. It is to ask how you're doing. It is that when one part of the body hurts, we all hurt. And if nothing else that we've seen over the past few years, we've been disjointed in that as a Muslim community. I don't want to become very critical in this conversation, but it's more like everyone for themselves. And that's not where we can or should afford or can afford to be. And so I'll tell you a very quick story. There's a church here in Springfield, Massachusetts, where I am. It's a Black church, historically Black church. Was built in 1950s, and in this past December, it was torched and caused over $100,000 worth of damage. And I just thought, where's people? Where are people? We're having church burnings in 2020, and there's just radio silence. Where's everybody at? And so I had reached out to some of the leaders in the Muslim community and say, hey, we got to show up. We got to show up. And I'll say I'm more disappointed than proud at the response. I did not think that we have shown up enough. But I'll tell you what I did. I felt helpless. I didn't know the pastor of the church. I felt helpless, but I picked up the phone and I called. And I said, Pastor, I'm sorry, I live down the street. If there's anything I can do, I'm really into interfaith solidarity and all these things. And I feel like I'm failing you and I'm failing your congregation. I'm one person, but here I am. Here's my number.
Right.
And even a gesture like that. And again, I'm not patting myself on my back. That was not brave. That was not courageous. That didn't take much. That was 2.5 minutes. But boy, when you get that call and you're the community of Islamberg and you just found out that the FBI just tore up a plot to come and kill your children with machetes, anybody in the Muslim community can make that same call and say the same thing. I'm one person. I don't know what to do. I don't know you, but I care about you. I love you. I support you. And I'm sorry that this is happening. Here's my number, call.
Right. Inshallah, we can work on this in the Muslim community as, we continue getting attacked. David, can you tell us if you have any projects planned where you're, telling stories of Muslims or addressing Islamophobia, and or maybe, even trying to empower Muslim filmmakers to make films about their own communities?
Yeah, I'm actually advising on a project right now, and I can't say too much about it, but it is looking at the occupation in Kashmir, and so with a Kashmiri filmmaker to tell that story. And yeah, I think I'm receiving an education, kind of looking at how American Islamophobic narratives have had ripple effects beyond our borders, and I definitely see this as one of those instances. So looking forward to having the filmmaker finish up and being able to share it with a broader audience.
Oh, that's amazing. So I know that we've exceeded our time thanks to my technological difficulties, which is it sounds so academic because they're the ones that have all the problems all the time. But I'm wondering if you guys have any concluding remarks. I'm of course, like super thrilled and excited that we had you both speaking. Tahara, thank you so much for all your work in defending the Islamberg community and Muslims at large. And David, thank you for, telling the stories that are often silenced or minimized. Do you have anything you want to say in terms of parting words? What do you hope people gained from this event? What should people do moving forward? Are there ways they should be showing solidarity? Anything you think would be helpful as we leave the community of people that have been watching this event and who will watch the event hopefully after this?
You want to lead it, Tata?
Why don't you take it away and I'll end?
I guess just support filmmakers, support Muslim filmmakers. I know that I get pretty regular emails from the Islamic Scholarship Fund. I know they've supported a number of great filmmakers that I know, and they've supported you, and you're connected with them as well. So yeah, just to kind of keep on the lookout for storytellers that are in your network, because it's really hard to get resources to tell these stories, and it takes a lot of time, a lot of energy to put them out there. So whatever you can, keep an eye out for them and try to share whatever support you can when you can. And just as always, so inspired by both of you, incredible women. I feel like I learned so much, and I feel just I definitely need spiritual vitamins, and just having contact and conversations with you is definitely a rich source of that. And I know not just for me, but for enormous communities of people who you inspire. So thank you both for all of your incredible work.
I just want to make a quick joke that you probably could make spiritual vitamins and sell them to white people. And then you could fund the Muslim filmmakers.
Sounds like a plan. My dad was involved in pyramid schemes growing up, so I learned a thing or two from him that I should be able to apply here.
Well, let me know if you need ideas. I have a lot of them. Okay. And then, Tahara, I want to hand it off to you.
Oh, for sure. Just words of advice for people. I continue to, since we're speaking about Muslims, I will go and talk spiritually. And a lot of times I'm secular, and I stick to secular points of view. But I want to suggest to people that they be in touch and be cognizant of their faith, of their belief in the Almighty Creator, in honoring what we are taught and told to do in terms of creating opportunities for fellowship, love, and concern. I want people to remember to take care of themselves, to forgive yourselves, to be kind to yourself, your family, and to the public as you move forward in this world. We are beat up enough. We do not have to join in and beat up ourselves along the way. And so for whoever needed to hear that, I'm sharing that today with the hope that you understand that we have a long journey ahead of us, a long fight that we may not even know what it looks like right now. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that we will always have tests and trials. And so we just have to prepare ourselves for whatever the next test and trial is, while experiencing joy, moments of peace and reprieve, and relationship building in the meantime.
Thank you so much, Tahara. That was very grounding and just really fills my heart. And I'm so fortunate to be in community with both of you. Obviously your work contributes greatly to sharing the stories about Muslims. And it's just really, it's been such a privilege to be able to speak with both of you. And, I hope we will be in touch soon, and, that this work continues. And for either of you and both of you, if there's ever any way that our community can support you, we would love to. So please do reach out. And again, thank you so much. We have this recorded. We'll try to edit out the gap in the beginning, but please do share it with your friends. And we'll hopefully kind of try to regroup in the future to bring on our JMC Racial Justice and Equity Advisor, Mariam Abdul Karim, who could not be here with us today. So thank you all again. And I hope you can, wherever you are watching this, give them a round of applause. They won't see it, but they'll know that you gave them some claps. And yeah, so I'm grateful. Thank you all again. This will be visible on all of the JMC platforms, so you can check it out after this event. So thank you and good night.
Thank you so much. Good night. And thank you
Great
for
job.
interpreting.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you for reminding me. Thank you to our lovely ASL interpreters who have been troopers with JMC.